Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, in this episode, we are unpacking the latest developments in the ongoing saga of Ukraine, Russia, and the European Union. A tale filled with high-stakes diplomacy, strategic posturing, and the occasional diplomatic snub. Now, let's start with the recent diplomatic developments in Europe. On April 17th, Paris hosted high-level meetings involving European leaders and U.S. officials aiming to reignite peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. However, a subsequent meeting in London 6 days later saw a significant downgrade when U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff pulled out. The reason? Ukraine's steadfast refusal to recognize Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, a stance that frankly should surprise no one. So, what is Europe doing about all of these developments? Well, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
So far, the process of ending the war in Ukraine has mostly been an American-led effort. The Trump administration came in swinging, hoping to end the war as quickly as possible with mixed results. Europe, for the most part, has been sidelined. One of the reasons behind this is that Europe has not really presented a unified front. Yes, Europe has supported Ukraine since day one, but the bloc's diversity has also led to decisions being made very slowly. Currently, the only plans Europe may have for peace are the offer of a so-called resilience force and the likely maintaining of sanctions against Russia. European leaders also continue to use very harsh rhetoric against Russia, unlike their American counterparts.
Does President Putin agree to an unconditional ceasefire? The Americans proposed it, the Europeans supported it. President Zelensky said yes. If President Putin says yes, the guns fall silent and tomorrow lives are saved.
While the US has supported Ukraine with arms more than any other country, Europe is where many Ukrainian soldiers have trained to use modern equipment and tactics. In the event of a ceasefire, it is unlikely that European countries will stop offering training to Ukrainian troops. So it seems that while the US is seeking an immediate resolution, everything else be damned, Europe is looking to be the one to make sure that whatever peace is achieved, it will not fall apart immediately.
And now let's zone in on the explaining portion of our show. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Vladimir Putin said he wanted to denazify the country in a special military operation. As the war progressed, however, this narrative became less and less important to the Kremlin. So, what does Moscow want now, and how likely is it to get it? Well, here's more.
No matter what it ends up getting from a future peace deal, Russia's initial goals of nurturing the Ukrainian state or perhaps even conquering the country are probably not on the table. Nonetheless, Moscow still has something to gain, and if it wraps its new goals into remotely acceptable peace conditions, then it might just get it. While it isn't easy to ascertain what secrets lie behind the Kremlin's red walls and colorful spires, given the positive response Russian officials had to a reported recent offer by the US administration, we can glean something about their intentions. First of all, Russia wants to keep what it already has. This includes Crimea. Not only that, but it wants this territory to be recognized as its own to some degree, as that will grant Russian occupation international legitimacy. Given recent reports, it is unlikely that Russia will have to concede much territory in a peace deal. The other major point that Moscow most likely wants to score is to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO, which would in turn allow Russia to continue to exert influence over the country. This is also a very likely concession that Russia will receive, given Trump's recent proposal. What Moscow won't get, however, and what it would dearly like to receive, is Ukraine's disarmament and an end to Western arms supplies. The issue of lifting sanctions is, it seems, also much more contentious, as while the US could be willing to do so, Europe is an entirely different matter.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. As for the preface, US President Donald Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Saturday at the Vatican during Pope Francis's funeral. While the setting was solemn and the photo op was perfectly staged, the meeting yielded no breakthroughs. It seems even divine intervention couldn't bridge the diplomatic divide. European diplomats, however, are not sitting idle. Their strategy focuses on sequencing. First, establishing a ceasefire observed by both sides, followed by lasting peace. Now, this approach aimed to ensure Ukraine's security interests are prioritized and not overshadowed by Moscow's terms. Europe is also considering assembling a reassurance force in western Ukraine. Now, they would focus on air patrolling to secure key transport hubs like Lviv Airport, while American boots on the ground are unlikely. European leaders hope for at least some political backing from the United States. Now, on the sanctions front, the EU remains firm. While the US has offered Russia sanctions relief, European nations are not in favor. In fact, Paris and Berlin are pushing for more restrictive measures, especially after recent Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities. The EU is also finalizing asset freezes and visa bans against individuals accused of hybrid attacks on the bloc. As for Ukraine's aspirations to join the EU, Brussels and key European capitals are clear. Moscow has no say in the matter. A Cyprus scenario is being considered where all of Ukraine could be part of the EU in theory, even if only parts are under Kyiv's control in practice. Now, this approach allows for progress without conceding to Russian demands. Europe's game plan involves a balance of diplomatic engagement, strategic planning, and unwavering support for Ukraine's full sovereignty. While challenges remain, Europe's commitment to a peaceful resolution is evident. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Krzysztof Jaworski, Institute for Security and International Development. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
So we would like to dissect kind of the European peace plan for Ukraine in this segment and kind of all the different developments coming from the United States, the EU regarding this particular situation. Now, can you help me understand how realistic you think that the European proposal could be put into place? The way I see it is the Americans are kind of refusing to engage, but the European peace plan also involves a lot of American engagement. There's a little bit of disconnect here, and how do we bridge that?
In my opinion, we will soon see the failure of the plan of US administration and Donald Trump to bring peace to Ukraine. In 2 days, we are gonna reach this first 100 days of Trump second term. Of course, he failed when it comes to 24 hours peace. Now he pushed this term toward 100 days, and soon, in my opinion, it will be a failure. And the question is whether Europe can get into the place of US and impose its own propositions when it comes to peace in Ukraine. And before analyzing it, I think we should look at why this Trump propositions failed. And it's because Russia is perceiving its power as enough to capture further parts of Ukraine, to break Ukrainian sovereignty. And what happens till today only proves that Russia is right, because Russia is violating ceasefire many times. Russia is attacking violently civilian targets in Ukraine. And what the US does? Nothing. Putin is in control of this peace talk, and he shows it continuously, and Trump is ignoring it. Yeah. So the question is whether Europe can make something to change this way Russia is behaving. That is the crucial questions, and the details of peace proposals are important as well. Mm-hmm. However, if there is no tool to make Russia stop its aggression and to make Russia agree to these peace proposals, each proposal is good, but we need to force them.
I think you made a very good point here. A lot of us are now kind of dwelling on the details and minutia of what's inside the peace proposal. But before that, we do have to take a step back and realize that without a proper enforcement mechanism, whatever's written on the paper is not going to work. So what do you think are the elements coming into this that can actually see any sort of proposal go through? Are we talking about more European boots on the ground, or any sorts of backing from Washington, be it even like politically?
I think these different tools should be harmonized and should be tested, which works, which doesn't work. However, the most important thing is to take action, because from mere talking, this peace wouldn't be there, because as we pointed previously, that's Russia who perceives its power as enough to go further. And what we have to have in mind is that when it comes to this military field, of course, the war can end when it's one on the other side. However, now it's not possible, because when it comes to US will not engage further in this war when it comes to military means, because they have other priorities. They fear of nuclear escalation. On the other hand, they fear as well too much collapse in Russia, because there will be chaos with thousands of nuclear warheads included in it. So if we look at US is clear on what they will and want to do, and they will not engage further militarily. When it comes to Europe, Europe is strong in words, of course, and in declarations. However, the question is about the actions. So this reassurance force of European arms in Ukraine may be useful, but there are a lot of questions which need to be answered. How big, where exactly located, which countries will be included, and what these forces will do. Will these forces only serve as part of protection of deeper part of Ukraine, or will these forces will be dislocated like near Kyiv or near Belarusian border, which will have its operational impact as well. So when it comes to these forces, and there are several other tools we should discuss, like seizing Russian assets. A lot of discussions till now, however, very little of action.
So looking into this peace proposal by the European Union, I'm trying to figure out if that also showcased a little bit of attitude when it comes to where Europe is going, because they still are quite insistent on Washington taking a significant bulk of responsibility when it comes to peacekeeping as well. Do you think that perhaps that's a little look into Europe's political will to also kind of step up into this role, seeing that they're still leaving some room for the United States, hoping that they would eventually step up in some form?
I think that's the reality. The real forces are that Europe needs to slower this downscaling of US engagement, of US support for Ukraine, because there aren't military equipment waiting on the shelves in Europe. There aren't some critical capabilities which Europe can provide instead of US. So first thing is that Europe must show its engagement. It's helpful in having US still there, because that's what US demands to Europe to take more costs, more responsibility of this supporting Ukraine and providing European defense. What I think is right about different peace proposals discussed in Europe is the fact that they point some things really strictly, and they are very clear on it. For example, not recognition of occupation of not ceding the territory of Ukraine. Of course, occupation is something which is de facto. However, de jure, there shouldn't be recognition of ceding these territories to Russia, because it will encourage further violation of international law, further violation of European security architecture. So these are things that I think are important, and it's good that are clear stated in European proposals. However, it's always the question of the tools to make it happen.
Right, so as I observe, we're seeing like a train running on two different tracks here. The United States, pretty clearly wants to recognize Crimea as Russian at this point. Of course, the EU are very reluctant to do so. And same situation with the tariffs, the sanctions that the European countries are still putting on Russia, where it does seem like US want to kind of give them a release valve, which, with things like tariffs and sanctions, if there's a way out, then it's not going to be as effective. Do you think that this two-track approach will come into conflict and will kind of damage the effectiveness of what Europe can do when it comes to limiting Russia's capabilities?
I think that this two-tracks approach is indeed ineffective, and it's lowering the impact the Western, the NATO countries has on this conflict. However, I suppose that if we look at this peace talks, Donald Trump made several mistakes. First thing was that he stated that he wants to have this deal until some specific term. It's a mistake, because it's making him vulnerable for Russian actions, and putting answer to this with, of course, not stopping the talks. He's saying that he wants peace. However, he is still attacking. He showed that he is in control of this process.
Giving him an end goal to like, okay, I'll just stall it until this point, and then everything is good for me.
Yes, and Trump made a trap for himself because if he invested a lot of his authority into having this deal. He is praising himself as the person who is really effective in reaching the deals. So now, if there won't be a deal, it will be cost for him when it comes to his authority, to his renown. And well, it's something that Russia is exploiting continuously now, because they will try to get as much as possible from US. Even this confusion, even this indecisiveness is something which plays positively for them. So I think that it's ineffectively to have this two-tracks approach. However, I don't see the real possibility now to make again this harmony between US and Europe, because there are deeper, different interests now, and a lot happened during this several months.
Yeah, we are seeing like a diversion of US interest compared to that of the European Union, but then the problem remains. And I think the question going forward is, do you think that there's any measures that the European Union can apply to kind of at least mitigate some of the impact that kind of this disunity might have looking down in the future?
I think it's needed to approach this with several ways, with several tools. First thing, we already mentioned is the seizing of Russian assets which are frozen in European banks. This is significant amount of money which could significantly help both when it comes to European defense spending, both when it comes to supporting Ukraine. Another thing is effectiveness of sanctions which are already imposed. For example, when it comes to shadow fleet. Part of this shadow fleet is going through Denmark maritime territory as well as Baltic Sea. NATO European countries could further tighten these sanctions and make them more effective. It's not about creating new law, it's about enforcement of this law which is already in place. So it's about another thing. And when it comes to further support or further spending is something which could be scaled up significantly, I suppose. However, it's really hard politically, because each country, each government has in mind the public opinion in their country, and this war already...
Fatigue, economic impact and all that stuff, yeah. And like you mentioned, I think it's a very important point going forward that, well, even if we can't come to any new decision, but be it sanctions, be it support for Ukraine, enforcement is something that could kind of that the European Union does have a thumb on the scale when it comes to this particular front. Well, last but not least, where do you see things going in the near future? Like you mentioned in the beginning of the interview, you don't think that Trump will be successful going forward with the negotiation, but also the Trump team is at least projecting some optimism in coming to some sort of conclusion. What do you think that conclusion might look like?
I think that, as I mentioned, there won't be peace in the short term, because Ukraine cannot stop defending itself, it's obvious, and Russia will not stop attacking, because it sees that it's a strategy, even if it's generating high costs when it comes to money, when it comes to soldiers and so on. For Russia, it, in their eyes, is working for them.
Right.
So US cannot effectively leverage even Ukraine, as we've seen till now. It cannot now leverage Russia into making some specific steps as well. Of course, possibly, potentially, they could, because they have a lot of tools, but it's not in their interest, because they are saving this power, they are saving these resources for stabilizing situation in Asia, to countering China. So that's why I suppose that this war will continue, because Ukraine has enough power to defend itself further, at least for several months. I suppose that if US will downscale its support, there will be additional support from Europe However, as we've seen in last years, this support is not enough to decisively change the way of war, so probably it will continue as the war of attrition, and well, both Russia and Ukraine has still some resources to continue this way.
All right, and we'll have to see how things turn out. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight and for being with us here on Eastern Express. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. For the first time since the rumors popped up, Russia has admitted that it deployed North Korean soldiers in Kursk. The Russian Foreign Ministry made the announcement in a statement praising the contribution of North Korean troops to the Russian war effort.
Moscow seems eager to boast about the friends it has. While the presence of North Korean troops in the Kursk region was confirmed by Ukrainian and Western authorities several months ago, neither Moscow nor Pyongyang had commented on the situation, until now. Referring to the strategic partnership treaty between Russia and North Korea, the Russian Foreign Ministry said that North Koreans had fought side by side with Russian soldiers to push Ukrainian forces out of Kursk. This declaration was also later confirmed by the Chief of Russia's General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, in a briefing with Vladimir Putin. While the exact number of these soldiers remains unknown, US intelligence believes that more than 11,000 of them took part in the fighting. The North Koreans reportedly suffered massive losses.
The UN Refugee Agency has introduced cuts to aid for displaced Ukrainians. The decision by the UNHCR comes after the agency lost US funding in the wake of the Trump administration's foreign aid cuts.
The UN Refugee Agency has urged donors to fund its more than $3.3 billion appeal. US aid has previously accounted for around 40% of the agency's funding for Ukraine. Given Washington's withdrawal, other donors from the West have also been scaling their support back, saying they are prioritizing defense spending. The current situation means that only 25% of the appeal to support over 8 million Ukrainians is being funded. This massive sum of money was a vital part of the effort involving a wide range of support programs for displaced Ukrainians, including psychosocial aid, emergency shelter material, and simple cash assistance. Russia has also been intensifying its attacks on Ukraine despite the ongoing peace negotiations, putting the lives of many Ukrainians at risk.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.